Larry,
Yes.
thanks for being here. Or rather, thanks for letting us be here.
Oh, yeah. I woke up this morning and there you were. I don't know how you got in the house, but
We have keys made.
you've been here so often, you have your own keys, right? Welcome.
Thank you. Let's talk about growing up. You were born in New York, is that right?
I grew up there. Yes, I was born in Manhattan. Despite what it says on the internet, I was born right in the middle of Manhattan, at and lived all my life in Manhattan.
Were you always into movies?
Always, always. That was my second home. Was the movie theaters. I was there for every movie that played.
Was there one particular movie that you saw that you realized this is what I want to do?
No, I liked them all. Usually sit through them twice if I could before the management would probably throw me out because night would fall and I would have to go home to my parents. But I would be back again for the next movie. So in those days it was double features. They had two pictures. There was the main picture and then there was the second feature, which was usually a Western or a crime movie or something, or Charlie Chan or Sherlock Holmes or something like that. And I loved them all. I just enjoyed all the movies and wanted to see them over again.
Were you a good student when you were going to school?
Not particularly. I got by. I didn't flunk out of anything. I managed to pass all my classes and everything. And when I went on to college, it was the same thing. I was really a C student in college. I wasn't much in terms of bringing home high grades. I was more interested in getting out of school every day and going to the movies.
So you were always writing?
I was writing, when I was a kid, I was writing comic books. I used to draw and write my own comic books from about age 8 or 9 on. And usually they were 52 pages or 68 pages, which of course comic books were much longer in those days. And I'd have 6 panels on a page, and that's a lot of writing and a lot of illustrating. I was pretty good at drawing at those days, and that's what I did. I mean, nobody wanted to see them, but I drew them anyway. I enjoyed it. Made up my own comics. And usually they were much more serious and intelligent than most comic books, which were, just people punching each other. But I had interesting situations and complexity, and some of the stories were good enough to be made into a movie, actually.
If only they made movies from comic books, right?
In those days, yes. Little did I know, when my parents threw away all my comic book collection when I was at camp one summer, that they threw away probably $100,000 worth of comic books. My comic book collection was probably worth more than my father earned in his entire life. And it all went down the incinerator because they thought I had outgrown comic books and they were gathering dust. So they threw them all out, including the original Batmans and Supermans and stuff that is really worth a fortune today. All gone.
Well, drawing and writing takes a lot of discipline. Did you have that just naturally, or was there someone that you looked up to?
No, for some reason, I just got into it and I wanted to do it, and couldn't stop myself. And it was something. It was a hobby, but it was an expression of what I wanted to do with my life. Really, even back in those days.
What sort of stories were you writing about?
Well, they were thrillers usually. One was a very good one about a guy who goes back into the past somehow, but he knows how to design airplanes and tanks and everything. So in medieval times, he creates all this military equipment and takes over everything. But he gets assassinated at the end. It was very grown up for a 10-year-old, I thought. But as I said, I could barely get my parents to look at the damn things, much less anybody else. I'd have to bribe people to read it by giving them a free comic book of some other choice, a DC comic book or something, But and then when I was about 11 or something, I decided to make a movie. My father had a Bell and Howell 8mm camera, but you had to wind it up. I think I have it in the closet still. And you had to wind it up, and it would run for about a minute. So you could shoot a scene up to a minute in length before the camera stopped. So I would do the whole movie edited in the camera, you know. So when I wanted to change the camera angle, I would just shoot that much, and then I would move to the other camera angle. So it was completely edited in the camera. So when you sent the film away to the lab to get it processed, and when the 8mm film came back, there it was. The entire film was all edited and everything, and it was pretty good. It was a pretty good little movie. I was telling J.J. Abrams about it when we had lunch recently, and you know, that the stories were very intricate and intelligent, and one was about a Russian spy who decides to defect, and he has his microfilm, and the Soviet agents want to get the microfilm away from him. He doesn't want to give them to the people he doesn't believe in anymore, so he has to hide the microfilm. So he puts the microfilm into the barrel of his gun. And when they catch him and they take his gun away, he wants them to shoot him, because when they shoot him, they will destroy the microfilm that's in the barrel of the gun. So, and J.J. Abrams thought that was very clever, and I think it's pretty clever too. And I shot the thing in Fort Tryon Park near my house where I lived in the Inwood section of Manhattan. It's a beautiful park, and at the top of the park is the Cloisters, which is a reconstructed monastery that the Rockefellers brought over. And I used to go up there and play as a kid, play Robin Hood on the parapets, drawbridges and stuff like that. It was a beautiful place to play. And in my story about the Soviet spies, the Russian agents have used Fort Tryon Park as a dropping point to hide the microfilm, and they hide it under a step in the park. And unbelievable to tell you this, but subsequently, after I had done my little film and everything, and years later, they captured Dr. Rudolf Abel, who was the leading Soviet spy in the United States, and God knows he was actually using as his dropping point Fort Tryon Park in Washington Heights. That's where he exchanged information with other Russian agents who were hidden in the United States. And that's exactly where they passed the microfilm, in Fort Tryon Park, where I had written my little movie. So it was an unbelievable coincidence. And of course, the Rudolph Abel is the character that you see in the Spielberg movie just recently being traded in
Bridge of Spies.
Bridge of Spies, yeah. So that's what happened to me. Unbelievable. But it only encouraged me more to go on and make movies.
So how did you get started? You were doing started with television, is that right?
Well, I was living in New York City, and there wasn't a lot of movies being made in New York, but there was television, and so I started writing for television. I just went around to every television production company in the city, and there weren't that many of them, and I pestered everybody to death. And finally, one company gave me a script and said, "This is what a script looks like if you want to know how to write one." And I went home. It was a Friday. I came back Monday. I called the guy to come out of his office, and he came back. He said, "You have a question about the script?" I said, "No, I wrote one." He said, "You wrote it over the weekend?" I said, "Yeah." He says, I said, "I'll call you next week and see if you liked it." He says, "No, if you wrote it over the weekend, I can read it tonight, so call me tomorrow." And he did like it, and he said it showed a lot of promise. He told me about some other projects they were interested in, and I wrote them on spec, and they didn't buy them. And then I wrote some more on spec, and they didn't buy them. I must have written 6 or 7 scripts for free, because I had this one guy's ear, and he finally broke down and gave me a job. So that's what I say, you know, most people would have walked away halfway through and said, "The hell with them, you know, I'm not writing any more stuff for free. They're taking advantage of me." But I didn't. I knew if I kept writing, sooner or later, they'd buy something. And they did. I was 21, and I was writing television for NBC. And the company was called Talent Associates, and the guy's name was Al Levy. He was the president of the company, and he gave me my start. And at the time, I was working as an NBC page boy over at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, ushering on shows like Steve Allen, Jack Parr, and all of a sudden, there were his newspaper articles. NBC page boy writes script. Had nothing to do with my being a page boy, though. It was one thing had nothing to do with the other. They were not connected in any way, but it sounded good. As if getting a job as a page boy would lead you to script sales, which wasn't the case at all. But there I was a writer, and I wrote a few shows in New York, and then I went to California, and I couldn't get arrested out here. First time I was out here, I was here for 6 months on unemployment insurance, and I earned $350. I sold a story to the Dick Powell Zingray Playhouse, and I got $350 for it. So it was pretty much a defeat. I went back to New York. Fortunately, I was called into the Army, so I didn't have to get a job. I was embarrassed running into people on the street saying, "When's your next script coming on the air?" Because worse than not having any career is having one and then be washed up at age 22 and not be able to get another job. And I thought, oh God, I had my chance. I got my publicity. I wrote a couple of shows, and now I can't get a job. What am I going to do now? But fortunately, the Army intervened, and I ended up down in Virginia at an Army base where I ended up. I was supposed to be a stevedore, loading and unloading ships. But fortunately, I arrived just before Christmas time, and I heard the chaplain was putting on a Christmas show. So I went over to the chaplain's office. This was the Protestant chaplain, and told him I was a television writer. And the next thing you know, he had me assigned to his office to write his weekly radio program. So I was assigned to the chaplain's radio program for the rest of the time I was down there. And so I had an office and a typewriter. So I started writing scripts while I was in the Army and sending them off to New York. And we also put together a performance of a musical play called Once Upon a Mattress, which I played the king. And David Carradine, who was also in the same unit, he was painting the chaplain's office. That's what he did. He and I were in Once Upon a Mattress, and we toured all the military bases in the South. And between that and the chaplain's job, I enjoyed being in the military. I was having a good time down there, and it was, I hate to tell you, but it was a beautiful base. And there were these middle-aged women, quite attractive, who lived near the base, who were married. But when their husbands were at work during the day, these girls would drive around the base and cruise. And if they saw you walking around, they would stop the car and pick you up and take you home and spend the afternoon in bed with you. And so this was a great place to be because I ran into several of these women and they kept me occupied. Well, I felt kind of bad about the poor husbands, but who am I to be choosy? I was down there in the Army, I had one thing about good about the Army was the movies were 25 cents, and they changed the movies a couple of times a week. So, we spent a lot of time at the movies and in bed with these strange women who were very nice, and I wonder what became of them. Anyway, after I got out of the Army, I had fortunately sold the script to a series called The Defenders, which was the #1 television show in the country. It was always winning Emmy Awards. And I managed to sell them a script, and they let me come in on weekends for meetings because they know I was in the Army, and I'd have to go AWOL over the weekend and take a bus from Virginia back to Manhattan and do the meetings with them. And they liked me. And the head of the show was Reginald Rose, who was a gifted writer who was famous for writing 12 Angry Men. And he was nice to me, and his associate David Shaw. They gave me a lot of jobs, and when I got out of the Army, I was writing episodes of The Defenders. And since it was the #1 show on television, that was good. It put me at the top of the business. So everything worked out. And then I came to Hollywood and decided I want to have another shot out here. And at first, the agents, William Morris, were telling me there were no jobs for me again. I couldn't believe it since I was hot as hell in New York, and now I was in California, and they were telling me there were no jobs. And then I got a phone call from an agent named Peter Sabiston, and Sabiston said, hey, I hear you're a good writer. I said, yeah, but you wouldn't know it from the way that William Morris is treating me. He said, well, give me a chance. So he got me 4 jobs in one day, and he became my agent for 25 years. And he was very loyal and responsible for almost every good thing that happened to me and all the movies that I was able to put together. He's passed away since, but the day doesn't go by that I don't think of him and be thankful that I had somebody who believed in me, and Peter Savston did it for me. He was a great agent, and that's a very big part of success, having somebody who's out there pitching you and telling people how great you are. And he was right, I was great, but somebody had to be around to tell everybody about it. And so then pretty soon we sold our first series called Branded with Chuck Connors. That went on Sunday nights at 8:30 and NBC. It was a great time slot because we were preceded by Walt Disney and followed by Bonanza, and those were the top shows on television. And even though we were on against Ed Sullivan and the FBI, we were coming in number 1. We were beating them the ratings, and the sponsor Procter & Gamble seemed to be very happy with us. But that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to make my own movies. So
how did you segue from
well,
television to
I had
film?
enough money. I mean, by that time I had already bought this house, and I was, a success. It wasn't like some of these poor kids who just come out of film school and have to borrow money from their father and mother to make their first movie. I went to a producer named Nick Vanoff, who had a TV series called The Hollywood Palace and another one called Hee Haw, which were variety shows, but he had made a lot of money. And I asked him to finance my first movie. And I told him, I said, Nick, if you don't get your money back, I'll write you a script for free. So he did give me the money to make the picture, and he never did get his money back. And he was such a nice gentleman that he never even asked me to write the script for free. So I got my first picture done, and it was called Bone, and a lot of it was shot right in this house. I thought, well, if I'm going to shoot a picture, I want to shoot a picture with a small cast and shoot it someplace I have control over and don't have to pay a lot of money to rent, so I'll shoot it in my own house. So I did, and it turned out very well. Actually, it's a picture that keeps getting better as the years go by.
Well, it's a very relevant movie. I mean,
Today, because it's about racism, and today, once again, racism is a major problem in the country. You would have thought 40 years later or 45 years later that this would be a thing of the past, but it's resurfaced again and is becoming a big sore point between people, between white people and black people. It's just amazing that this hasn't been resolved in all the years that have passed. I would have thought it was over. But people do respond to the movie, and every time it plays anywhere, or every time the DVD comes out in a different form, whether it's a Blu-ray or whatever, and it gets reviewed, it's always the pick of the week, and it's always it gets fantastic reviews. I only wish that it had gotten those kind of reviews when it first came out, because I think it was too shocking when it first came out 45 years ago, that a comedy about a black rapist coming into a house in Beverly Hills, and it's supposed to be funny. I mean, and it is.
It is funny.
It is funny, but it's funny in a very interesting way, in that it doesn't take away from the serious treatment of the situation, of the problem, of the hatred that goes on between certain factions of the white race and the black race, and in reverse. So, actor named Yaphet Kotto played the lead, and he was wonderful. And to this day, it is the best film he ever did. And everybody in the cast was wonderful.
Well, why didn't Bone catch on when it came out?
Well, first of all, the distributor of the film, Jack Harris, who's a very good friend of mine over the years, but he's a terrible distributor. He decided to sell the picture as an action exploitation film because of the success of pictures like Shaft and Superfly. He thought he could sell this picture. I said, Jack, it's a comedy. You can't sell it as an action film because it isn't. I said, when people order vanilla ice cream, you give them the best chocolate ice cream there ever was, and they don't like it because they ordered vanilla. I said, people pay to see an action movie, and you give them a comedy. He said to me, well, am I going to stand in the aisle and tell them not to laugh? I said, Jack, please, that's not the point. They bought a ticket to see a certain kind of movie, and they're not getting it. Well, he wouldn't listen to me, so he opened the picture his way, and some of the reviews came out and said the most unintentionally funny movie we've seen all year. So he shot himself in the foot, basically. But one of the good things about the movie was I got George Folsey to photograph the film. George Folsey was an elderly cameraman from MGM, director of photography, who'd been nominated for 16 Academy Awards. This man had been the director of photography on pictures like Meet Me in St. Louis, with Judy Garland movies, Gene Kelly movies, Lana Turner movies, Joan Crawford movies. He'd worked with everybody, and here he was working for Larry Cohen on his first movie, shooting right here in this house. So God bless George Folsey. What a break that was. And he brought with him all these old guys who were retired from MGM, who didn't want to sit around the house anymore, even though they were old. They heard there was a movie being made. They came right over and worked on it. And they were the lighting people and the grips and the technicians. They were all in here working for me, guys who'd worked with Greta Garbo, for Christ's sakes. I was so thrilled, with the whole possibility of now working with people whose movies I'd seen as a child. And here they were working with me. So what a wonderful opportunity that was.
Is that how you met George Folsey Jr.?
George Folsey Jr. came in, I was the camera operator, and he became the editor. And
Of
he
your next movie.
he edited the film Bone. And then in the next picture, he edited Black Caesar for me.
Even though Bone wasn't successful, did that lead to you getting Black Caesar for AIP?
Yes, because Sam Arkoff, who was the president of AIP, called me in and he said, well, you really know how to direct those black actors. I said, Sam, there was only one black actor in the movie. And he's just like every other actor. There's no different way to direct a black actor than a white actor. Well, he said, we're looking for a project to do an action picture, a gangster picture or something, with a black cast, to cash in on some of these successful black exploitation movies. I said, well, Sam, I happen to have something in the car. Let me go down and get it. And there was a treatment we had for Black Caesar, which had been commissioned by Sammy Davis Jr. To star him. Sammy wanted to get away from just being a flunky to Frank Sinatra and play something with some meat in it, rather than playing the garbage collector in Ocean's 11, which is what they gave him to do. These wonderful liberals, So I wrote this thing for Sammy. He was supposed to pay me $10,000. When time came to get the money, his manager came to me and says, Sammy's being audited by the Internal Revenue and he hasn't got any money and he can't pay you. So what am I going to do, sue Sammy Davis Jr. for $10,000? Okay, I said, I'll keep the treatment. So I had it in the trunk of the car. When Sam Markoff said that, I went down and got it. We made a deal that very afternoon, and I was in business to make another picture. Just coincidence, that's all. So the tragedy of getting stiffed by Sammy Davis turned out to be the best thing that could possibly happen.
Well, Black Caesar, it led on to the sequel, Hell Up in Harlem.
Well, Black Caesar was my first hit. The picture was a blockbuster. It really made so much money and played so many theaters, and very shortly after it opened, they wanted a sequel, so I had another picture to make. But the thing about that picture that was interesting was at the end of the movie, the lead character, played by Fred Williamson, he gets killed. He's wandering down through the slums of Harlem where he grew up, and he's mistaken for a derelict because he's been shot and he's wounded and he's staggering around, and a bunch of black kids corner him and beat him to death and steal his watch. And when we ran the picture at a preview at the Pantages Theater here in Hollywood, it was going great until the ending. And then the audience went crazy, particularly the black people in the audience and the women in the audience, the black women. They started screaming at the screen, and they accosted me in the lobby. I thought I was going to get attacked. And I called Sam up and I said, we're in terrible trouble, Sam. They don't want him to die at the end of the picture. And Sam said to me, to his credit, I told you not to kill him. And I guess it was true. But I thought that was an appropriate ending because James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson always died at the end of these gangster movies. And so why shouldn't the lead in my picture? But anyway, I said, Sam, I got to fix this. He says, how are you going to fix it? The picture opens in New York City in 3 theaters in a few days. I said, I'm going to fly to New York. I'm going to go to the theaters. I'm going to cut the ending off the picture. He says, you're crazy. I said, well, let me do it. He said, he gave me permission. So I went to New York. I went to the theater on Broadway, and I met the projectionist. And he'd never met a director in his life. No director has ever gone into the projection room at the movie theater. I told him I'm going to cut the ending off the picture. So we rolled down. I cut it off. He spliced on the end titles. Then I went over to the east side, RKO 59th Street, and I did the same thing. I cut the last scene off. Then I went up to 86th Street, to the RKO 86th Street, introduced myself. Manager took me in. I cut the ending off, spliced on the titles. Picture opened. Was a blockbuster. There were lines around the block. It was February, and there were people out in the cold lined up to get into the next show for an hour before the show started. And they added a show at 2 o'clock in the morning, and that ended about 3:45. And they opened the box office at 8 o'clock, and they started. Picture was playing for like 22 hours a day, and filling up the theater. It was amazing. It was amazing. I thought every movie would be like this. I said to my wife, this is great. We used to just drive down there, just to drive around the block and see the crowds outside the theater saying, this looks like Radio City Music Hall. You know, there's people lined up. They won't go home. They want to see the picture. They even raised the price by $1 after a couple of days. I couldn't believe it. I was thrilled, and I thought, that's it. It's going to always be like that. Well, it isn't, but it was a nice experience. I have had a few hits.
But you had a problem when you did Hell Up in Harlem because of a scheduling conflict with Fred Williamson, right? How'd you work around that?
Fred Williamson was hired to do a picture called That Man Bolt at Universal, and he was working 5 days a week. And I said, we got to do the sequel. And he says, well, I'm working. I said, well, you're not doing anything Saturday and Sunday, are you? So he says, no. I said, okay, we'll shoot this movie on Saturday and Sunday. So that's what we did. And then I went to New York, and I shot all the big scenes in New York with a double who looked like him. And then we came here and shot the inserts to put him into the scenes. And then we shot the lengthier scenes right here, a lot of them in this house, which I turned this into a church. And I turned this into a nightclub one time. So, and of course he shot a lot of scenes up in my bedroom. So we got the picture made, and it turned out to be a hit also. So as a matter of fact, in some markets like DVDs and all, we've made more money from Hell Up in Harlem than for Black Caesar. But I will credit AIP and Sam Arkoff with this. I made 6 or 7 movies for them, and every one of the movies I made there went into profits. And to this day, I'm still getting the checks from MGM, who now acquired the rights, and they still send me the money. And it's, my God, it's 40 years later, still getting money from these movies.
Really?
Yeah, and every picture I did for AIP went into profits.
Even the Private Files of J. Edgar Hoover?
Yes, that picture went into profits. I got nearly $400,000 in profits off of that movie that hardly played anywhere.
How did that happen?
Well, I don't know, but the checks cleared, so I took the... I know how it happened. It happened because they sold it to a tax shelter. In those days, you could sell movies to tax shelter groups, and the tax shelter group would get a tax deduction, and then they would basically contribute all the basic cost of the movie. So what happened with Hoover was, as I recall, they paid for the entire movie, and I got a bonus of $100,000 right away. So the whole picture was in profits before it ever played anyplace. So, you know. And then Sam and AIP made a mistake with the picture. They decided to open it in Washington, D.C. for the premiere. And they showed it at the Kennedy Center first, where it went over like a lead balloon. Because first of all, everybody in Washington is politicized. So this picture, it was anti-Nixon, and it was also anti-Kennedy. It was anti-Democrat. It was anti-Republican. It showed all the politicians as being dishonest and hypocrites. And J. Edgar Hoover, he wasn't so terrific either. But there were no good guys, all bad guys. Well, that's not what you can go on a show in Washington, D.C. and get any kind of response, because everybody hated the movie, particularly the Washington Post, who tried to destroy the movie. In the end of the movie, stated that Woodward and Bernstein, the Washington Post reporters, got all their information from the FBI. And it turned out years later that Deep Throat was Mark Felt, the acting director of the FBI at the time. So I was way ahead of my time. And Broderick Crawford was wonderful as J. Edgar Hoover. And we had a wonderful cast.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a fantastic cast.
Oh, and to get to work with Jose Ferrer and Dan Daly and Rip Torn was wonderful, one of the best things he's ever done. And every time we've ever screened the picture, we screened it at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, went over it beautifully. And Rip's wife, Geraldine Page, came to see it and everything, and it was a wonderful experience. Every time it's played, and when it played in London at the London Film Festival, it just went over like gangbusters. I was very disturbed when I went to the film festival. They told me, "Oh, we're not playing it at the National Film Theater. We're playing it at the Odeon Leicester Square on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock." I said, "Oh, people go to church in England, and who's going to show up? And what's the Odeon Theater on Leicester Square?" And then I found out that was the biggest theater in London. And when I got there were no seats available. I couldn't find a seat to sit down in. The balcony and the orchestra and everything was just full. And the picture went over beautifully. And I stood in the back and watched it. And then they booked it into a Screen on the Hill, a theater in London where Woody Allen's pictures play. And we were there for 8 weeks. And then the BBC bought it and played it twice on the BBC. So it went over great in England. And over in the United States, the picture was virtually ignored. So what can you say? I mean, I think it needs to be rediscovered. And the way these pictures get rediscovered is on Blu-ray.
Well, a lot of your movies get rediscovered, and I think it's because they're so contemporary. I mean, like Bone. I mean, these are subjects that never go away.
Well, all the movies I think are fresh and entertaining and fast-moving. And, I don't usually make pictures that are overly long. I think the problem with most movies nowadays is they're too long. Mm-hmm. People just, make a film and they don't want to throw anything away. The director usually gets final cut and he doesn't want to discard anything that he shot. So the picture goes on and on and on. Sometimes the same scenes get played 2 and 3 times in different locales. It just drags the thing out forever. So the old days when the studio cut the pictures, there was a certain value to that. Mm-hmm. Yet somebody else came in, cut the film. You know, John Ford, who was probably one of the greatest film directors of all time, he'd make a picture at 20th Century Fox, Grapes of Wrath or whatever, whatever he would make, and How Green Was My Valley, wonderful films. He'd shoot the picture and then he'd leave, and he'd let Zanuck cut the film. That's it. He trusted Zanuck, and Zanuck came in and cut the film. That was it. Today, you never hear of anybody doing that. Mm-hmm. They have to be in charge of every phase of the production. Well, I can't fault them because that's what I do. But I just do it because we can't afford to hire other people. You know, I have to do it all because, it's a Larry Cohen production, and that's the way it goes. But most people don't have the total responsibility and the total control that I have, where I wrote, produce, direct, edit, and usually hire the composer.
Well, I wanted to actually jump back to It's Alive. It's a movie that preceded J. Edgar Hoover. That was a movie that you made for Warner Brothers, but you had total control over it?
Yeah. The Warner Brothers, they didn't have any time to worry about little pictures like It's Alive. They were too involved in the big picture that they had The Exorcist at the time. So they never came around, they never looked at any dailies, they never looked at anything at all. The only thing they did was to help me get Bernard Herrmann. When I heard Bernard Herrmann was available, they made the contact, and then I was able to talk to Bernard Herrmann on the phone in England and get him to do the picture. I sent him over a print of the film, and he said he liked it, and he agreed to do it. And after that, Warner Brothers had absolutely nothing to do with the picture anyway. And when it arrived, they didn't want the picture anymore because the executives who had hired me to make the picture had been fired, and a whole new administration came in. So the new administration said, well, we don't want a picture about a monster baby. A monster baby? That's in bad taste. And I said to him, didn't you just make a movie where a girl masturbates with a crucifix? I mean, is this in good taste? You're telling me that The Exorcist is in better taste than It's Alive? Come on, It's Alive, by the way, got a PG rating. I mean, it didn't even get an R rating. So they didn't want to release the picture, and they made only 50 prints of the film, which is like nothing for a big studio like Warner Brothers. And they dumped the picture out, and they didn't even advertise it as a picture about a monster baby. The ad campaign was, whatever it is, it's alive. Whatever it is? What do you mean, whatever it is? What's the gimmick of the movie? Every horror movie succeeds if it has a gimmick, a hook, a premise. This picture had no premise. So, they said, well, we told you it wasn't going to do any business. I said, what do you it's a self-fulfilling prophecy with you guys. If you want the picture to fail, you'll figure out a good way to make it fail. So now there's the picture. It's playing now as a second feature in drive-ins. And then there it is on Hollywood Boulevard. In those days, there was a bunch of grind theaters. There was a theater there that had a triple feature. And the third picture on the bill was It's Alive. I'm saying, I'm now part of a triple feature at a theater that charges 50 cents. What happened to my career? So I never gave up. Now the administration at Warner Brothers changes. It's 3 years later. There's no video in this time, and they couldn't sell the picture to television. So there's the picture still sitting there, and 3 years have passed, and a new guy comes in, and a new advertising guy who had worked at a studio where he did the campaign for a picture called Willard, about a kid who has rats. And I called him up, Arthur Manson, and I said, Arthur, if you made a success out of a picture about rats, you can certainly do something with a monster baby. He said, all right, send it over to Warner Brothers, I'll look at it. So he calls me up, he says, that was the scariest damn thing I ever saw in my life. We got a new head of distribution, a guy named Terry Semmel. He just came in. I'm going to get him to look at the picture. Phone call, Terry Semmel. Larry, that was the scariest thing. I got chills for the whole hour and a half. I checked it out. Warner Brothers treated you in a terrible way. They just shortchanged you completely. I'm going to re-release this movie. I'm going to have a new campaign, and I'm going to send this picture out again. I says, when? He says, it'll take about 5 or 6 months. I says, wait a minute. Suppose you're not there in 5 or 6 months. He says, don't worry, I will be. Well, he was. He soon became chairman of the board at Warner Brothers. But this was his first success. He took a picture which had been around for 3 years, had played in double and triple features. He put out 1,000 prints, which was a lot of prints in those days, opened the picture with a good campaign. #1 at the box office. The top grossing picture on the variety charts, It's Alive. Picture, money rolling in, millions of dollars coming into me, and all because of Terry Semmel, and also because I didn't give up, because I kept bothering people. And I was told by a lot of people, including my lawyers and all, stop it, you're making a fool of yourself. You're becoming an unpleasant appearance at Warner Brothers. They don't want to hear from you anymore. The head of Warner Brothers Distribution said to me,
yeah, you're wasting your time, kid. It's a preordained thing. It's a flop. Forget about it. Go on, do something else. It's all over.
I said, please, Leo Greenfield. I said, Leo, I'm not giving up.
He says, well, maybe you're right, because I thought Billy Jack was a piece of shit.
I said, okay. You admit you can make a mistake. But he wouldn't admit it. So finally he left too. He was gone by the time Terry Semmel came in, and it was a whole new ball game. So that's what happened. And picture's an enormous success, and the money's been coming in ever since. Even Warner Brothers had to pay me. And they don't pay anybody usually, but they've been paying me all these years. And then we made 2 more It's Alive movies over the years. And then I think we sold the rights a few years ago to Millennium to do another sequel. They did a dreadful job. The picture was never even released. It was so bad.
Yeah, it was a remake, right?
I don't know what it was supposed to be, but it was just terrible. And I urged everybody not to see it. It was just, even the head of the company, Avi Lerner, stopped me on the street in Beverly Hills and apologized for making such a dreadful movie out of my property.
To get an apology out of Avi Lerner, that says something.
I mean, I never heard anything like that happen. I mean, that was almost worth the entire experience, just to have Avi Lerner say how sorry he was. I don't know if he really meant it, but he didn't have to say it. But anyway, that picture's gone, and we may do another one. There's a lot of talk about.
After It's Alive, you make, I think, one of your best movies, God Told Me To.
That was.
Well, I guess that was after J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, I don't remember the order of the damn things, but God Told Me To was a lot of people think that's a great movie, and I think so too. And
well, God Told Me To is just this sort of just the epitome of a Larry Cohen movie to me, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, it takes place in New York. It's very chaotic. It's paranoia. It's questioning religion. It's questioning your parents. It's about aliens. It's about religion. There's so many things, and yet you follow all your own rules, and the whole cacophony of this bizarre movie works.
Well, nobody would have made the picture but me, I don't think. I think that it's an example of me getting to make a movie that nobody else would make, and certainly they wouldn't make it the way I made it. And people say, well, why do you continually want to make low-budget pictures? And because with the low-budget pictures, they leave you alone, and you get to make your own movie, and you make all the decisions and make all the cuts, and you control every element in it. And you can hire the best composer you want, and as long as you pay them, as long as you have the money to pay them. And so I try to conserve money while I'm shooting, so I have enough money left over to hire the London Philharmonic and Miklos Rozsa or Bernard Herrmann or Frank Cordell, and get a really wonderful sound on the picture. So that's my main interest is in total devotion to the movie, and total control of the movie.
But you don't seem to lose sight. I mean, some people, when they have all that control, they get overzealous, I feel like. And your movies are very tight. I mean, your script, I guess it's because of the script.
Well, I change the script a lot when I'm making the picture myself, of course, based on what I see, the locations I find. I try to write the locations into the movie if I can. Like when I made Q, we got the Chrysler Building. Well, that wasn't in the script. The Chrysler Building wasn't specifically in the script where the bird was nesting, but when I got the Chrysler Building, I went crazy because this was the epitome of the nesting place that a giant bird would pick in New York City, because the whole building is kind of bird-like. It has feathers and everything's made in silver. It's the most beautiful building in the city, and it was a terrific find, and we did pay a lot of money to use it, but it was worth every penny. So I try to integrate whatever I can get into the picture, and the picture changes as I'm doing it.
Well, that script even was originally not the movie you were going to make when you made it, right? Weren't you doing I, the Jury at that point?
I was making a picture called I, the Jury, which I'd bought the rights to the Mickey Spillane novel, and I was trying to create a franchise where we'd make a bunch of Mike Hammer movies, because I'd read a review in the New York Times by Bosley Crowther, a big critic, when Dr. No came out, James Bond's first movie. He reviewed it and said that it owed a great deal to Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer. The sex and the violence and everything was very reminiscent of Mike Hammer. And I said, well, how come they made such a huge box office franchise out of
James Bond?
James Bond, and they never did anything really with Mike Hammer. So I got the rights to Mike Hammer's book. It was the largest selling mystery novel ever written in terms of sales. And I wrote a script, and we got financing, and we put it into production. And I started working on it. But I was trying to do it my way, the way I always do, with improvisation and bringing in new things because of the locations. And I mean, they loaded the thing down with crew. We had nearly 100 people on the crew. we were shooting in apartments and houses where we could get maybe 20 people into the location, and 75, 80 people were standing out on the street. And I'd say to them, well, why do we have to have all these people? Send them to the location for tomorrow and let them set up and put the lights up and everything so we can get started at 8 o'clock in the morning. Oh, we don't do things that way. I said, you do things like having 80 people standing around the street eating sandwiches all day. You know, you're wasting a fortune in money here. That's not the way I do things. Well, that was the way they did things. And they thought I was crazy. So anyway, finally I said, I can't stand this. I can't make a picture if I have no control over what I'm doing. So I more or less got them to fire me. You know, you can't quit because they could sue you for holding up production and stuff. So you got to make them fire you. So I got them to fire me. And then a day later, I started shooting the other picture, Q. A day later, I was in a helicopter the next day shooting the aerial stuff. And a couple of days later, the entire cast was there, and I was shooting the whole picture. We were all staying in the same hotel as the people making out of the jury. So they'd see me in the lobby with my people, my cast and my staff and stuff, and they couldn't believe it. This son of a bitch is shooting another movie? And we finished way ahead of them. We finished in 18 days. They shot for so long with their new director that the company went bankrupt finally. And they had to sell the picture in a bankruptcy sale. And subsequently, I think they spent $7 million on the picture. We spent $1 million on ours. We all opened the same day in New York City. Unbelievably, 6 months later, both pictures opened the same day. We opened at the Rivoli, which is a great theater, where Jaws opened originally, and they opened up the street at the National, which is also a nice theater. So we did 3 times the business that they did. That picture cost 7 times as much, and we did 3 times as much business. And their picture was soon forgotten. And, you know, as I said, the company filed bankruptcy, so nobody got anything out of it. It was just a shame. And of course, that was the end of the Mike Hammer franchise too. So it never happened, which I think would have been successful.
Well, I mean, going back to Q, I mean, it's such a New York movie. I mean, do you like making your movies in New York? I mean, it seems like you can get away with so much more in New York than you could with
It's not just that. It's just New York is such the greatest backlot that ever was. I mean, you just can't find a street that isn't interesting. First of all, you got all the old buildings and all the old alleys and all the cracked sidewalks. And then you got all the skyscrapers and the modern buildings and all the new stuff and the new condos and the Trump Tower, you know. I mean, God. I should have had the monster attack the Trump Tower. That would have been carried Trump away.
Well, didn't she lay her eggs in the top of Trump Tower, and that's...
No, the country laid its eggs in Trump Tower, unfortunately. But actually, you know, speaking of him, years ago, the network TNT hired me to write a movie called The Donald Trump Story.
Really?
So, yeah. So I went to Las Vegas to meet with Donald Trump. And the producer and I went down there. He was at Caesar's Palace. And we stayed next door, another hotel. And pardon me. And I went over to the hotel with the producer. We got there, and we were in the middle of the casino at Caesar's Palace. Millions of people milling around. And I said, "What do we do now?" The producer says, "I don't know." I says, "What do you mean you don't know? Don't we have a contact number? Don't we have somebody we're supposed to call?" He says, "Nobody told me anything." I says, "How could we come all the way down here to Las Vegas to meet Donald Trump and you don't know where to find him? And we're in Caesar's Palace." Wait a minute. I went to the house phone. I said, "Hello? Donald Trump, please." Voice comes on the line. "Donald Trump, please." "Yes." "Mr. Trump?" "Yes." "We're here from TNT to talk to you about this movie we're making. It's a dramatic movie about you." Oh, come on back. Go to the back of the casino. There's a double door. It's closed. Just wait. I'll send somebody to get you. I got him on the phone. I just I'll try the White House. Maybe he'll pick up the phone there too. So anyway, they bring us back to see him. There he is in his shirt sleeves with his sleeves rolled up. He was very casual, very comfortable. This is a long time ago. And he was very charming. And he was very interested in the movie being made. And halfway, about an hour into the thing, he suddenly turns to the open door to the patio outside. He has a private little pool out there, and he says, "Hey, M, get in here." And at that moment, instantly, Marla Maples walks into the room, and she's in a two-piece bikini, very tan, with high heels, hair all fluffed up. He just wanted me to see her, you know. He wanted me to see that he had this beautiful girl there. And she made drinks for us, and nuts and pretzels and all the schmear. And then she went back outside, and we spent a little more time with him, and he talked about the show. And then he invited me to a party that night at the hotel where I could bring my wife. So we went over there and spent the evening with him at the party. And the next day was the National Book Show that he was there for, because he had a new book. We got up and looked at the New York Times, front page story. Banks call Donald Trump's loans. Oh, God. The very next day. So anyway, we went to the book show. We didn't talk to him there. Monday, we got back to Los Angeles. TNT canceled the movie. Because of Donald Trump's financial difficulties, they canceled the movie. So I got paid in full. I got paid all the money, and I have a completed script that I wrote called The Donald Trump Story. What am I going to do with it?
Well, your movies always flirt with politics, sometimes a little more overtly than others. Where do you stand politically?
I'm completely independent. And just like in the J. Edgar Hoover movie, everybody's corrupt as far as I'm concerned. If anybody is able to run for office and gets the backing of their political party, they're already so corrupt by the time they get that nomination that they're hopeless. They couldn't have got the nomination if they weren't corrupt in the first place, because the system is corrupt. And that's the way it is. It's sad to say, but that's the way it is, and it's probably that way in every country in the world. Mm-hmm. You know, because let's face it, politics is just another racket.
And it's show business. It's
show business, and it's a racket. And I have to say, I feel the same way about religion. I think it's also a swindle and a racket and a con. That's all. You know, if anybody walks around telling me what God said and what God thinks and what, you know, come on. How do you know what God says and what God thinks? I mean, the fact of the matter is the first people that would get it up the giggy if God showed up would be these religious, you know, pontificators. Mm-hmm. They don't, you know, so I don't have any faith in politics or in religion.
Well, all your movies seem to swirl around all these ideas without being preachy ever. I mean, so obviously you see fertile ground in a lot of these ideas that religion and politics have to offer.
You know, I mean, even charities irritate me. When I keep getting these things in the mail with charities where they're sending me stickers and stamps and scarves and I turn on the TV and I watch these endless commercials for charities on television. You know, for charities for children and charities for cancer and charities for this. Who's paying for this TV time? If you want to do charity, you find a family that's in need like we do, and we try to help them, personally.
I want to talk a little bit about The Stuff. Here's a movie that is
also... Wait a minute. The Stuff. Wait a minute here. Give me that.
You can't get enough of The Stuff.
You can't. There it is. The Stuff. Don't eat it. It'll kill you. It doesn't say that on here, though.
Well, I mean, this is a movie about challenging the FDA a little bit, wouldn't you say?
Well, the FDA deserves it, don't they? Look at all the stuff that is poisoning people that's on the market. You go into the store and you pick up and look at the ingredients and on different products in the store. I mean, you could be there half an hour just reading the ingredients, and there's all different chemicals in there, different chemicals, all the breakfast cereals and cookies and crackers and desserts and the stuff that's in there. Nobody knows what all that crap is. I mean, and we're eating it, and we're feeding it to the kids too.
So, and that's what The Stuff is really about, right? The
Stuff is about, you know, the consumer. It's a consumerism picture. It's about the fact that we're being poisoned. Listen, when I grew up, every other television show and radio show was sponsored by cigarettes. Every comedian, whether it was Bob Hope, Abbott and Costello, Jack Benny, everybody that you loved was sponsored by cigarettes. LSMFT, Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Today, we're sending 20,000 packages of Lucky Strike cigarettes to our boys in uniform in the Pacific. That's what they did during the war. Everybody in uniform got free cigarettes. And you know what they did? They addicted an entire generation of young men. So when they came back from the war, they had to smoke for the rest of their lives. And the tobacco companies killed more American soldiers than the Japanese and the Germans combined.
Sure, it's a monster movie on the cover, but it's always about something else. And this is, I think, a great example. It's like, is that what you're always looking for? I mean, is this monster as a metaphor?
Well, you know, one thing about all my movies, they have this in common. Every movie is the same, has got the same thing in common with every other movie. You take something that is usually considered to be beneficial and you turn it into something evil. So there's an ambulance. Usually you hear an ambulance coming, it's a vehicle of mercy. In my movie, it murders you. The ice cream in here, here's ice cream. What could be more wonderful than ice cream? It kills you. All right, there's a baby in a crib. Baby is the most adorable thing in the world. Oh, kitschy coo, look at that sweet little baby. And then the baby murders people, right? I mean, Maniac Cop, but a series that I disavow most of the time, but I did write it. And there's a cop. All right, I'm in trouble. I see a cop. I'm gonna run over to the cop for help. The cop kills me. I mean, every one of these movies, the FBI, everybody always thought the FBI is above reproach. Wonderful organization. Well, not in my movie. The FBI there's a lot of bad things too. All right? I mean, you go right down the line on all the films. It's even God told me to. God. What's more wonderful than God? We worship him, we love him, and we hope God will love us. Not in my movie. You know, so every one of the movies has that one string of things in common. That's something that you usually perceive as wonderful and beneficial is inherently evil.
Is that the hook when you start writing a script? It's like, what can I turn on its ears?
Well, no, it isn't. It just turns out that way. And after I've written it, it occurs to me that this falls in line with the movies I've made over the years. It just happened, but it wasn't conscious. It's all subconscious. I must say most of the writing I do is from the subconscious mind, not from the conscious mind. When I just start writing, I usually don't have any idea where the story's going to take me. I just start it, and I don't know what the ending's going to be or where it's going, but I write it, and then, you know, sooner or later, it turns out to be the movie that you see. But it wasn't the movie that I started to write because I didn't know what I was writing when I began. In fact, that's why I enjoy writing, because I don't know what's going to happen next. I can't wait to get back to the table again the next day and find out what's going to happen to these characters, where they're going, how it's going to pay off. But I didn't know when I started. I just got the jumping off point, and then I get into it, and I improvise it as I'm going along. And so I can do this with my own material because I don't have to discuss it with a studio executive or a producer, because I'm doing it all myself. So I don't have to get involved in getting approvals or explaining things. I'm just writing all from my subconscious mind. That's the way it happens. And I'm more surprised than anybody how these things turn out. I swear, it's a strange experience. If you haven't had that experience, then there's no way I can define it for you, you know? It's just a wonderful thing that you, that just happens, you know?
Well, it's a great segue into my next couple questions. You know, what is your writing process? Do you work on multiple scripts at the same time?
I generally don't work on multiple scripts at the same time. I generally start to write something and I get wrapped up in it, and I don't want to go away from it and deviate on it. I want to finish it. I want to find out how it's going to come out. You know, like I said, I can't wait to get back to work again because I'm just as interested as anybody else, hopefully, will be, when I'm writing it. It's like seeing a movie in my head. I want to see how it's going to work out. And I've written a lot of different ways. I've used the type. I used the type with such violence on my Royal Standard typewriter that the whole desk would be full of dots, or I punched out all the periods, and they'd be all over the place. I was hitting the keys so hard. And once or twice I was writing scripts and I looked down and my whole hands were covered in blood because I'd cut my hand on the typewriter from hitting it so hard. But I never noticed because I was typing away for such a long time. And then finally when I stopped, and I used to like to work at night because I had kids and I didn't like my wife to have to say, leave your father alone, he's working, don't go in his room, don't bother him. I didn't do that. I spent all the waking time with the kids and with the family. And then after everybody was asleep at night, around midnight or something, I'd come downstairs and work till 4:30 in the morning or something, typing away. And then I'd sleep till 11 o'clock or something like that. But I used to do all the work at night. And that way, people never saw me working. They say, where do these scripts come from? When do you write these damn things? We never see you working. Well, I'm always working in the middle of the night. There was no phone calls. There was nothing to, in those days, there was no television at night, really. And so there was nothing, no distractions. Just keep working all the time. And nobody bothering you. So that was it. Then later on, I went to dictating. When I was doing TV shows and series and stuff, I had to write a lot of episodes. I had secretaries, and I would dictate to them. And then I started wearing the secretaries out. They couldn't keep up with it. They'd come back to me. I was at 20th Century Fox. They come to me crying, Mr. Cohen, please send me back to the secretarial pool. My hand is paralyzed. I can't do this anymore. So I get another secretary. And then after that, I got a tape recorder. And I tape recorded everything. And then I liked the tape recording process because I was living in New York at the time, and I had that nice brownstone. And I could go to Central Park a block away, and I could take my tape recorder and I could walk through Central Park for hours talking into the tape recorder. And people would think you were crazy because that was before cell phones came in. Everybody now is walking around talking to nobody all the time. So I was talking to the tape recorder, and then I'd send them to typists, and they would type it up. And then I reverted to the old school of writing longhand with a pen in notebooks, which is what I do now. And I like the idea. I feel the dialogue running down my arm into the pen and into the paper. And I write the scripts. They're much more sparse now that I'm writing longhand. I don't put too much directions in or too much scenery directions. It's all mostly dialogue today. And now that I'm down to writing with a pen, the next thing I'll probably do is a quill. So I'll probably be writing the next scripts with a quill and an ink pad, a little ink.
Pretty soon you start chiseling them into stone.
And someday I'll be chiseling them into stone. But I'll probably be up in heaven by that time if there is such a place.
But you're still very active writing.
Oh yeah, well now I'm writing for cable TV, and I'm writing a new series for cable TV for 1-hour thrillers that I think will be terrific, and I'm hoping that my friend J.J. Abrams will be the executive producer, and I've written so far 17-hour shows for this series, which should be enough for 2 seasons.
Well, it's funny that you bring up J.J. Abrams because when I think of something like Lost, I really feel like the entertainment industry has gradually caught up to all the things you've been doing all along.
Well, I hope so. The reason I contacted J.J. was because I saw a documentary on him, and in his office behind his desk, he had the It's Alive baby on a shelf. He had his own model of it, so I called him up to see if he was a fan or not. And sure enough, he called me up personally a couple of days later. No secretary or anybody, just him on the phone, telling me how thrilled he was that I called and how much he wanted me to come out and have lunch with him. And so we got to be friends. And he suggested that we do this hour show together. So I'm hoping that it will work out. I have had no problem writing the episodes. So let's see what happens.
And not only film, but just sort of like the culture that we live in. I sort of feel like I'm sort of living in a Larry Cohen movie sometimes. It's crazy. There's just a lot of wild stuff that happens that is sort of taken almost as the norm.
Well, I tell you, the stuff that happens in real life, if you put it into a script, people would tell you it's not believable, it's not acceptable, it's not logical, it's not coherent, and yet it happens. I mean, how can it happen? How can a bunch of guys fly airplanes into buildings and kill 3,000 people? I mean, if you put this in a script, absolutely insane. But it happened. And there's violence happening all over the place. All these killings in schools and, terrible stuff that you never imagined would ever happen before. We didn't have this happening before. And I do remember the assassination of President Kennedy, followed by the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, followed by the assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, we had a period of so many assassinations and attempted assassinations. I mean, that was and now we're going to the era of shootings. People going into movie theaters and shooting people. People going into schools and shooting people. What a cycle this is. Why does these things run in these strange cycles? So
I mean, when you see it, felt like God Told Me To seemed like a far-fetched thriller, but now it doesn't.
Well, we also had Sniper in phone booth.
Right.
Same thing. I mean, for years I was trying to figure out how to do this movie in a phone booth, and I talked to Hitchcock about it, and he was fascinated with the idea too, but we could never figure out why the guy couldn't leave the phone booth. And then I realized I'd already done it before in God Told Me To. I had the Sniper. All I had to do was combine the Sniper from God Told Me To with the phone booth idea, and by that time Hitchcock was dead.
Well, Hitchcock and even your films, they're all about this collective fear. You know, what are we afraid of? Is that why we go see movies and read these stories? Is it a coping mechanism?
Well, I think people always like to be scared. Even as children, they like the fairy tales, and they're always quite scary. And even the Walt Disney movies that we cherished as children always have very scary moments in them. Whether it's the witch in Snow White, or the deer's mother being killed in Bambi, or Pinocchio being captured by Stromboli. I mean, he knew that kids liked being scared, and grown-ups too. And you know, the principal audience for horror films, the theater managers have told me, are teenage girls. They love horror movies, even more than boys.
Do teenage girls come up to you and tell you how much they love your movies?
No, I don't see too many teenage girls at these autograph shows. Usually I see a lot of very kind and gentle guys usually come up. Not too well dressed, but usually a little dazed looking, but friendly and kind, and
Movie buffs.
They're fans, and God bless them. I'm glad the movies mean something to them, and that they are so familiar with so many of these movies. So it always makes me happy. That's why I go to these events, to see the people and give them a chance to see me. And I'm glad you came.
Thank you. Well, I was just going to say thank you for letting us come. And,
hey, listen, anytime. I'll give you a room upstairs, and we can.
We already have keys.
Yeah, you've already got the key to get in, and so we can continue this ad infinitum. In the meantime, goodbye, everybody, and thank you for listening.